Well, welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining us after, the morning of the last day of the conference is always a bit of a tricky one, so we very, very much appreciate you all being here. We hope that you really had a great time yesterday at the dinner and after, and we don't want to know the details, but we hope that it was all really, really splendid. So we have quite a bit of a program still today, so, we hope that you're still sticking around for as much. It's not on? Huh? Hello? It's what?
You're too big.
You're too tall. I'm too tall.
Yeah.
I can sit down. But...
I just increase the volume a little.
Is that better? There you go. Anyway, I was just rambling on about how it's so nice to see you all, so I'll just leave that bit now and move on. So, it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce Lena Lavinas. I was personally really, really keen to have her here, so it was really, really great she accepted the invitation. So, I want to say just a few minutes of why we were very keen to have Lena. I want to share you with my thoughts. So one of the points, of course, is, as we all know, the basic income debate has really, really moved on massively in a few years. The movement is growing massively. And it becomes really, really interesting to start thinking about what that means going further. So for me, two things are important. It's bringing in new people into these debates. So we've tried to do that, try to bring new people into the program as we can. But it's also about bringing in people who actually have been part of the debate and for some reason never been as central as they should be. And for me, Lena Lavinas really is one of these people. This is a person who has done a lot of work on basic income, right? And I think the time is absolutely ripe to basically bring in a lot of our ideas and give that much more central space. So Lena actually, as some of you know, was the organizer of the 2010 Congress in Sao Paulo, which was a really interesting conference, as as most of these are, but this one particular. And so, so she's been around, she's an activist, she's a scholar, and her views are really, really important. And I think they are becoming more important as the debate develops. So I want to share just three aspects of, I think, why this is really very important to have her here. First is about the work she's doing and the particular part of the world that she's focusing on. Lena works on Latin America and Brazil specifically. Now, we're here in Finland, we're talking about the welfare state. We're often talking about European Nordic welfare state, but social protection and welfare states is a global debate. And we need to understand what goes on in the other world. I was very, very keen to have a perspective from a different part of the world in here to put this in context. Now, I spend a lot of time personally in Chile and in Argentina, so it's an exciting part of the world with a lot of challenges, so we hope to learn from that, right? The second thing is that Lena is one of those people, and I think this is essential. She's combining a lot of insights on the aspirations of basic income and the idea of basic income with a very, very critical perspective on its realization. Lena focuses a lot on institutions and on the landscape of policies in which we have to implement this. And as basic income is becoming more of an actual policy idea, we need to start really, really looking at how this fits into very different contexts. And I think Lena's work will have a number of insights, very important insights into it. Sorry, my computer is just blocking here, which is not very nice. Okay, there we go. And finally is a focus on some of the latest developments post-2008 crisis, right? So one of the insights or one of the focuses of our work is and I have to be careful here, the financialization of social protection. I was just telling Lena, this is the worst word you have to say on the Sunday morning after conference dinner, right? You couldn't find anything easier to label. But this is the topic of her recent work. She actually published a book recently, The Takeover of Social Policy by, again, Financialization, the Brazilian Paradox, published a year ago?
Yeah,
2017.
Yeah.
So I think these three topics together, these three focuses together, really is going to bring a very new perspective. I'm just going to very briefly say a little bit about the bio of Lena. So she's Professor of Welfare Economics at the Institute of Economics at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and a senior researcher at the Brazilian National Research Council. She holds a PhD from the University of Paris, economics?
Exactly, economics.
Economics. Yeah. And most of her research focuses on Brazil, Brazilian economic development, redistribution, social policy, institutional arrangements, basic income, and also the comparative analysis of welfare regimes in Latin America. And as I already said, there's a book out just very recently, which is really very interesting, and you should take a look out. And without further ado, we do the same as we've done in the first day. We have a 25-minute lecture, more or less, and then we'll have some time for some questions. Okay? Without further ado, Lena.
Thank you. Good morning on the last day of our Congress. My thanks to Jürgen. First of all, it's a pleasure to be sitting next to someone who is not only very generous, but whose work and commitment to the idea of basic income has been such an inspiration. I'd like to thank all the organizers of the Congress for the invitation, in particular Joanna, who kindly took care of all the travel arrangements. So it's true that my last BIENCongress was in 2010, as pointed out by Jürgen, and then, just as now, it was a big success. I've been away from our Congress in the last few years, it's true. But that doesn't mean I've turned a blind eye to this new moment for basic income. While it offers some hope against a challenging political and economic backdrop, it also calls for caution. We must be cautious when approaching a consensus that may also hide profound differences amongst those who support basic income as the leading policy of the turn of the millennium. Like you, I see citizens' income as a progressive leftist policy, whose radical nature stems from a commitment to the idea of emancipation. Emancipation from the logic of the market, subservience to capital, and from the countless forms of domination that intertwine to make us up. Its main goal is thus to allow us to live a more genuine life, as Amartya Sen has argued, along the same lines as what Robert and Edward Skidelsky referred to in their recent book as The Good Life. The title of my presentation is, Can Basic Income Resist the Financialization Logic? But it could also have been, which new dilemmas are on the horizon for advocates of basic income? Louise Haag pointed in her talk that global changes may bring new opportunities for basic income. I couldn't agree more, but I would add new challenges too, and not small ones. A revival of the idea of basic income is a paramount feature of current times. From the left to the right, across the political spectrum, voices increasingly converge in claiming that an unconditional and universal basic income would address major social and structural problems, such as today technological unemployment and underemployment, extreme poverty, welfare traps and hidden disincentives to work, freeing humanity from bureaucracy and poor jobs and enabling them to reach their potential. Beyond ideas, government with distinct political majorities in which conservative forces are dominant have also been pushing for variants of basic income. In my opinion, what has been tested so far is not really a universal basic income scheme, but rather new modalities of unemployment welfare benefits in times of growing inequality, long-lasting wage stagnation, enduring poverty, and low economic growth. This would mean that we are drawing on the idea of basic income to move towards solutions that fly against the essence of a truly universal and unconditional citizen income. Indeed, under the influence of this paradigm, we may be able to partially reform welfare regimes and take recipients of means-tested benefits and conditionalities. This trend is already taking place in several countries. This approach would mean that basic income is seen primarily as a means of tackling poverty and curtailing administrative costs and bureaucracy. Therefore, my warning is that we should be wary of incremental approach to the implementation of basic income despite positive outcomes such as the culling off of conditionalities. I'll concede that this is not a minor issue, quite the contrary. Dropping all strings attached to income transfers, making them truly duty-free, as stressed by Van Parijs, may become reality, which would be a major victory on its face. But this may come about less in the name of justice and equity, and more so because it serves a new regime of accumulation that can do without controls to guarantee that everyone has a monetary income. This will in turn guarantee permanent access to financial markets whose advance has taken amazing dimensions. While in 1990, global financial assets amounted to 50% of global GDP, or some $150 trillion, in 2015, that figure stands at $500 trillion, or over 400% of global GDP. My understanding is that social protection schemes and social policy in general are increasingly unable to cope with the structural changes marked by the growing prevalence of financial markets and financial motives. Therefore, they need to be updated. Controls and conditionalities, as seen in the multiplicity of means-tested programs that have proliferated since the 1990s, especially in the Global South, are proving ineffective. A new generation of cash transfers programs is on the way that may reconfigure conditionalities, if not fully waive them. In such a polarized world, is it possible that basic income may escape ideologies and end up as a cure-all solution to persistent problems in labor market flexibility, technological change, new forms of entrepreneurialism, and the growing concentration of wealth? Or will it reinforce the primacy of modern finance over our lives by spreading the use of social policy as collateral for accessing new financial products and living on debt? This is my major concern today regarding this extraordinary move in favor of basic income worldwide, especially since the great financial crisis of 2008. Basic income is back on track yet again, this time benefiting from a much wider support, especially from conservative forces, public visibility, and a sense of urgency in the aftermath of a severe financial crisis whose consequences haven't yet been entirely offset. In times of fiscal austerity and finance-dominated capitalism, basic income is presented as a sound public policy worth a try, with merits that increasingly appear to be outweighing its drawbacks. Why is it so? Under financialized capitalism, regular income streams are essential to smoothing the process of market incorporation, but also to stimulating and amplifying financial inclusion. They serve as collateral in a world in which debt is gaining ground, thanks to the expansion of various forms of loans and consumer credit lines, enabling access to durable goods and services that used to constitute the bulk of public provision, such as healthcare and education, but also, and essential, to meet daily needs and cope with contingencies. Financial innovations based on individual loans secured by income are one of the building blocks of a securitization dynamic that enables the continuous renegotiation of debt, expanding and consolidating new financial instruments. The transformation of social policy into collateral reflects the breadth logic of financialized capitalism, which converts cash transfers, pensions, and other monetary schemes, sources of regular streams, into assets placed at the disposal of the financial sector. They are then used to service debt and generate new income streams. Through this process, social policy, originally conceived of as a mechanism of decommodification, becomes both a vector for increasing household income to its beneficiaries through loans and also a source of financial profits for the banking system and the insurance industry. I argue that social policy in the form of entitlements has been increasingly called upon to serve as collateral. The same process ultimately transforms entitlements from rights into assets. It's no accident that reforming social policy is at the center of what the work of finance is in the current moment. So my question here today is, in times of financialized capitalism or finance-dominated capitalism, what role may a universal basic income be called upon to play? Since the early 1990s, I have been a greater supporter of the idea of a basic income. Now, however, I fear that basic income may simplify and reduce social policy to a single cash benefit, with all the rest being market provided, most likely through banks and insurance. When I hear Chris Hughes, one of the co-founders of Facebook, advocating, such as Zuckerberg, for a variant of basic income because he's skeptical of the elite and of people in power, I would say, just like him, that I'm also skeptical of the global elite to which he belongs, in which includes not only the very wealthy, but also the representatives of modern finance who are now behind the dissemination of this radical idea. It's no coincidence that Goldman Sachs is involved in this case. Giving $500 on a monthly basis to every person who makes less than $15,000 per year, Mr. Hughes says, would improve education and health outcomes. This is to say, as Mr. Hughes sees it, this cash transfers, the simplest intervention ever, as he puts it, could be channeled to pay for a better education or to buy a healthcare premium, services that are increasingly commodified, hence funneling more resources to the financial sector, segmenting access according to income levels against principles of universalism. My aim is to invite you to reflect upon how financialized capitalism has subverted and reshaped social policies, breaking away from previous frameworks grounded in principles of decommodification, and redistribution. In this process, new blueprints come into sight, which raise concerns and call for caution, and which may be altering the role of a basic income is expected to play. Excuse me. As I said, basic income is revolutionary because it's a means to emancipation from market relations and freedom from different forms of domination. What if it becomes a direct connection to the financial sector, or a mechanism that ultimately redefines the logic of social policy? From a mechanism for risk reduction and prevention, which can also be a tool when fighting inequality and poverty, it may be transformed into a stable source of income, bolstering and even creating financial markets, particularly mass markets for consumer credit, mortgage, and pensions. In order to survive, the financial systems must continuously prospect for new asset streams that can be turned into collateral through novel strategies of capitalization. In what follows, I will touch on issues relating to this concern. First, I will briefly characterize this new accumulation regime called financialization. Second, I will call your attention to the fact that financial inclusion schemes are popping up in line with a wide dissemination of cash transfers to fight poverty, especially throughout the Global South. We can safely say that the idea that everyone should receive at least a minimum income has advanced considerably since the 90s, when the World Bank and the IMF stood firmly against it, saying that giving strings-free cash to the poor would wind up exacerbating the deviant consumer behavior typical of that clientele. This fear was allayed as those close to the subsistence level become more monetized through income transfers, making way for a broader process of bancarization and financial inclusion, which has now taken on a massive scale. Finally, I will discuss why collateral is crucial for financial capital to expand and how this may yet again subvert the very essence of a basic income. Let me turn to my first point. Under the aegis of financialization, the forms, content, and objectives of social policy have been reshaped, and so has its complementarity with the accumulation regime. But what exactly is financialization? Financialization is a new stage in the development of capitalism. It's a process by which financial institutions, financial markets, and financial actors gain influence over the real economy. It comprises a wide array of empirical features and processes that paint a portrait of a new accumulation regime in which macroeconomics and economic policies are increasingly dominated by the rationale of financial capital, with detrimental effects on labor, on monetary and fiscal policy, therefore harming the state's autonomy, with detrimental effects also on productive investments and on daily life. It's not only a matter of the greater weight of finance, but notably of a much wider scope of application. Financial markets and transactions overshadow production and trade. Profit-making tends to occur increasingly through financial channels rather than through productive activities, disseminating shareholder values and investor ideology. This financial valuation of capital transfers the bulk of the accumulation process from production to property, strengthening rentier incomes and interests. interest-bearing capital takes the lead in producing wealth for the few. This process has not only adversely affected industrialized economies, but developing countries as well. Under the age of financialization, finance has gained autonomy and is no longer subordinated to production, as it happened to be the case under previous regimes of accumulation like Fordism. Amongst other consequences of the deployment of finance-dominated capitalism, we may cite consumer-led booms based on credit and growing levels of household indebtedness. Financialization has expanded to the point at which some may speak of financial citizenship, of even democratization of finance, meaning that we are witnessing a massive process of financial inclusion. But as I said, one of its main features is growing debt. In advanced economies, the brutal rise in household debt came to compensate for stagnating wages thanks to orthodoxy imposed fiscal austerity, which even saw the wage bill shrink in several countries. In many emerging countries, meanwhile, the growing debt-to-income ratio came amidst the rise in salaries and average income. The spreading phenomenon of deep household indebtedness, thus, does not reflect a single trend, that of financial compensation for falling salaries, as an alternative way to keep up deteriorating consumption patterns, but is rather a substantive change in the relationship between households and a variety of financial circuits. The explosion of household credit does not merely fuel the expansion of aggregate demand, but also, and above all, a new form of the provision of services such as housing, healthcare, and education, now via market and financial circuits. Financialization has greatly enabled increased borrowing for households. As one extra measure that spurred access to borrowing, credit standards have been lowered and credit requirements eased as a result of the financial deregulation and liberalization that have gained momentum since the late 70s. As a consequence, households started experiencing permanent indebtedness, some in the form of a mortgage, but more often in the form of consumer credit. Rising debt-to-income ratios are not only a concern in the advanced economies, but a troubling dilemma in the developing world as well. While in the former, mortgage debt makes up the bulk of household debt, around 50%, in the emerging markets economies, debt is mainly linked to consumer credit, at about 66%. What is striking is that, according to numerous surveys, the share of low-income households in total debt has grown and keeps growing pretty fast. And as a consequence, the number of households in default are also rising at dramatic pace. Let me give you some figures on South Africa and Brazil, just to illustrate this trend. Let me remind you that both countries have been lauded for the broad coverage of their safety nets. According to the South African Reserve Bank, over 70% of disposable household income in South Africa is committed to debt repayments, an unsustainable level by any standards. In the case of Brazil, the Brazilian Central Bank estimates that the debt-to-income ratio for all Brazilians reached 48% in 2015. If we focus only on borrowers, it hits an average 64%, reaching 73% for households at the bottom of the distribution. Even Bolsa Familia recipients, 14 million households, haven't been spared from this debt spiral. 1.4 million households haven't taken out loans, on average 10 times greater than their monthly stipend. They are now in default. They remain poor, but now they are poor in default. We have now 59 million people in default in Brazil, 90% of them from the lower middle classes and below the poverty line. This is a record-breaking. Expenses on clothes and food account for the vast majority of these unpaid debts. We know that debt is a persistent cause of dispossession and impoverishment. Debt threatens our autonomy, not to mention that being in default is a terribly damaging situation that undermines people physically and emotionally. Since modern finance has a bountiful array of risk management industries designed to provide a certain measure of economic security in times of economic hardship and welfare loss, all that would remain to do would be to establish the necessary links in a more proactive manner, a role to be assumed by the state, responsible for providing legal environment through which to facilitate the functioning of all these extended and inclusive financial markets. This is where social policies come in, under new structures and with new functions, especially cash transfers, which are on track to become the bulk of social policy, not least in countries where social protection systems are virtually non-existent. This leads to my second point. In recent years, a wide range of countries in the Global South has adopted anti-poverty cash transfer programs. Very often, these programs became the backbone of incipient, fragile social protection mechanisms. According to the most recent World Bank report on this topic, the State of Social Safety Net 2018, 2.5 billion people are covered by safety net programs in developed and transition economies, which is not a negligible figure if compared to more than 2.2 billion Facebook users worldwide. This is a spectacular achievement, to say the least, despite the fact that the average household benefit amount differs significantly across countries, ranging from $106 per month to just $27 per month. But the point I'd like to underscore is that what's spreading is not just the idea, but all the practice of ensuring a monetary income for those in poverty. This is no longer a problem with a moral call to arms, but a model for social policy. Giving poor people money is cheap, easy, and has powerful impact. But beyond that, it facilitates the process of financial inclusion, which allow the most vulnerable, historically unbanked social groups to become clients of the financial sector. It all starts with opening a bank account to receive the income benefit paid out by the state. Next is easy access to other financial products, the commonest being cheap insurance policies and, above all, loans. What strikes me is that, in line with the widespread adoption of cash transfer schemes, well-orchestrated programs of financial inclusion underwritten by the state are also coming into their own in the Global South. Income transfers recipients have become the targets of financial literacy courses as an inoculation against over-indebtedness and default. And so it has been that in recent years, in step with models recommended by multilateral agencies, the Global South has seen the spread of a great variety of mechanisms for guaranteeing monetary income. Conditional cash transfers, unconditional cash transfers, social pensions, child grants, family subsidies, provided and administered by the state, where the common denominator is the goal of ensuring regular income streams. These mechanisms have had the effect of reshaping social policy, giving it a new scope and an unprecedented function to serve as collateral, with the state as the underwriter. It's not an accident that even the IMF has proposed a new BI to Mexico, as highlighted yesterday by our Mexican fellows here during afternoon session. The definition of collateral is straightforward. Collateral is a security pledged for the payment of a loan so as to decrease the risk of default, making the loan less risky. Now, in times of financialization, its use is broadening through a set of routinized practices. When lending to low-income groups whose creditworthiness cannot be assessed directly, financial institutions face an adverse selection problem. To address it, they can either apply higher interest rates, which may render the loan unattractive or even prohibitive for the borrower, or require sufficient collateral as appropriate insurance against the high-risk borrower. Neither option holds for low-income or poor borrowers. They cannot afford paying high interest rates, nor do they have any kind of physical or financial asset to secure a loan. It's precisely in this context in which credit rationing and lack of credit hinder one another's expansion that social policy, through income transfers, comes to serve as collateral, reducing risk for both borrower and lender. Cash transfers underwritten by the state and now enshrined as the blueprint for social policy in the Global South have come to fulfill collateral requirements beyond their more conventional role of mitigating poverty. The role of the state is also altered. Since creditors rely on connections, recurring information gathering so as to estimate the risk of default, and collaterals to encourage mass inclusion in the financial system, it falls to the state to strengthen the twin strategies upon which the expansion of financial markets rests: the creation of collateral on one hand and the systematizing of information about the unbanked and undocumented on the other. One of the most startling consequences of the collateralization of social policy whatever their design, has been the exponential growth of household debt and debt-to-income ratios, phenomenon now characteristic of the start of this century. And this was made possible thanks to the adoption of multiple forms of income transfer policies indispensable to the materialization of financial inclusion strategies, which were non-existent less than a decade ago. To close out this presentation, I would like to raise some questions that worry me deeply. To what extent might a universal basic income paid by the state to all citizens of a country escape from the logic of the collateralization of social policy inherent to the stage of financialized capitalism? It seems clear that the value of a citizen income, given the present situation, would be hard-pressed to cover all of an individual's basic needs which are only growing in modern society. Wouldn't this activate its function as collateral, ultimately compromising its emancipatory essence and yoking us all to rentier capital through indebtedness? Or might it indirectly fuel the process of the complete financialization of the provision of healthcare and education, funneling public resource towards major insurers, investment funds, private equity funds, and other financial agents? Is there a risk that what was meant to preserve our autonomy might come to serve the accumulation of interest-bearing capital? Should we tackle this risk or forge ahead despite it, given that, whatever the regime of accumulation, the ideal of a basic income will remain intact and grounded in solid principles and good values? Today, social policy would seem to be a central cog in the machinery of financial accumulation. As Lovolo phrased it yesterday, finance is not alien to the welfare state, quite the contrary. Can basic income escape the place set aside for it in that machinery? Maybe if, and only if, certain conditions are met. I see at least 3 of them, and this will be my final points. The level of a basic income has to be established not as a complement, rather low as seen in many proposals and experiments so far, but as a means of fully decommodifying access to basic needs, including food, clothing, and transportation. Therefore, it should quite probably be fixed in each country at the level of minimum or living wage, whether they exist. This is the only way to diminish the chances that it will serve primarily and predominantly as a collateral. Second, in parallel, 3 main public provisions should be guaranteed: free and universal health care, education and training, and finally care. Strong and very aggressive housing policy would also be crucial, with rent regulation and property taxation expanding the supply of affordable housing in order to keep real estate speculation from taking off, which might happen as a result of increases in real incomes. None of these conditions will be possible unless we move beyond the current Basel Accords and impose strong controls and regulation on the financial sector as a whole, in addition to severely taxing financial rents so as to strengthen the real economy once again. Would that be enough to effectively resist financialization trends that run counter to principles of emancipation and greater equity? Might citizens' income help us to overcome financialized capitalism one day? Or will it instead deepen our dependence on the financial sector? In the end, it may simply be crucial to carry on the idea, whatever the present or future risks. But I don't feel comfortable with this. So I would like to share with you my preoccupations. And I want to listen from you some maybe answers or insights in order to overcome this dilemma we are now facing. Thank you.
That's a very sobering reflection on a Sunday morning, but it will raise a number of questions, no doubt. So let's maybe start with Almas in the back there.
Hi, Alma Zalecki from NYU Shanghai. And Lena, thank you so much for this wonderful and provocative and thoughtful talk. It strikes me that, of course, at the heart of what you've been saying is that there's this tension between the way that our economies evolve and the way that social protection evolves to meet it. So clearly, in a more financially oriented economy, social protection does have to, at least part of social protection has to take the form of cash benefits, of financial benefits, so that everyone can be, a player in this kind of financial market, right, as opposed to a more land-based or, some other kind of economy. But you point out that, of course, providing the basis for participation in the financial economy means that people can also be exploited in that financial economy as well. So I was happy to hear your proposals at the end for how to avoid this. And I was wondering if it also indicates something that we should keep in mind in terms of the financing of basic income, because we hear many different proposals for financing basic income out of resource dividends, out of income taxes, or out of capital taxes, out of carbon taxes, et cetera. Does your concern about the financialization of social protection lead you in the direction of favoring one form of financing of basic income over another?
Okay, thanks, Almas. It's important to keep in mind that social policy always responds to the needs of the regime of accumulation. Then this is why on the Fordism, with this more homogeneous working class, we're facing the same risks as Ruben Luvolo pointed out in our session. Of course, it was easier to identify these risks, and we created social insurance. Now it's different. So first, financial markets are very volatile, as we know, speculative. Okay, so it's speculation which runs, because we have those securitization markets with pool debts together, and for the security markets to exist, they need debts. So I think that we're moving towards a situation in which it's necessary to create debts and to promote debts in order to expand the financial markets on derivatives, securitization, and things like this. So it's not that people are exploited. People are expropriated. So we are transferring rents to the financial sector, okay, through interest-bearing capital and other sorts of expropriations. But the point is, we can't do anything without severely taxing, you see, what is called the financial sector. But so far, we've been completely unable to do so. So because, you see, we saw what happened with Obama when he became president in the United States with the subprime crisis, and how millions of people lost their homes because houses are not homes, they're assets. And this is it. This is the way things go. So, of course, if you want to implement a basic income that will be really emancipatory, I think that we should think that it's completely necessary to have a more regulated and controlled economy. And, of course, controlling the financial sector. And, of course, we need to tax capital. We need to control the wealth. They have to, and I think that it's very important to go through a very deep financial reform, okay, a tax reform, sorry, because otherwise the state would never have the resources it needs, of course, to finance even, let's say, low amounts of basic income. But the point is, we have to promote basic income. Basic income should serve as a counter alternative to the financial sector. You see, I want to have, a decent life. I should be able to live on those. And if I need more other notions of consumerism people may have this in mind, then of course they're free to do what they want. But of course, without a profound tax reform that taxes capital and that changes radically the way the financial sector creates wealth, I think we cannot move further.
Thanks. We have time for a few more quick questions. Mark?
Okay, so Mark de Basquiat from France. First comment, your speech was very, very full of energy, but very quick. And I'm not sure I was able to catch everything. So will it be on a internet site somewhere so we can get it, or maybe distributed?
I have published many papers already on this. There is a paper on development change that explains all this process, yes. Okay,
so anyway, in what I haven't heard anything about microcredit. Maybe should say a word about microcredit, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
On the last question is, in France, we put a lot of energy in order to put together all promoters of basic income. Will they be left-winged or right-winged? And we work a lot together. in order that we really have one proposal that we can put forward to the government, which is really an alliance between right and wing, and left. And apparently you don't seem to believe this is possible. But in France, I think we can do it. I don't know in Brazil.
Do you think that, excuse me, I did not completely understand, I apologize. So you're saying that basic income is something that will bring together the right wing and the left wing?
Yes.
Oh, that's terrible. I don't believe.
This is what I feel in your speech.
You see, I don't believe, because look the direction the right wing is taking. Come on. We have to look at what is going on around us, because otherwise we're going to think that, you see, the right wing is the center. The right wing is not the center. Okay, we moved, the left wing moved to the center. And this is why we experience such, you see, backdrops now, because we have moved to the right. Because if I have moved to the left, things would be different. Look at what Social Democrats did everywhere, in Germany, in France, with Macron, everywhere. Look South America, what happened with the pink tide wave. Look at this. So, I'm sorry, I don't think, so if the hegemony is on the left, maybe we can come to converge to an agreement. Otherwise, I don't think so.
Okay, anyway, I strongly believe that in France it is quite possible to have some combination of forces, right and left, because there's a lot of opposition on the left. There's a lot of opposition on the right, for opponents everywhere, and their proponents everywhere as well. So we work together in order that we have really a shared
the experiences we have with big coalitions so far have not been that great. But in any case,
we try.
No, but just to come back to your point on microcredit, we have Philip Mather's book on the financialization of poverty, also Bateman work on microcredit, and microcredit is exactly the same logic, you see? It's giving cash to the poor to increase their autonomy, because then, you see, they can implement, they will become self-employers, micro-entrepreneurs, and of course, there is this idea behind microcredit, like now when we are waiving all conditionalities, the idea that if people to whom we give some cash go to the financial sector, there is the self-control. Because, of course, we don't need conditionalities if there is self-control, because people are supposed to pay back their loans. And, of course, they will have to respect payment deals and that sector, otherwise they will be in default. So there is this idea that if people move towards the financial sector and they get included in the financial sector, especially low-income families, that they would benefit from another kind of discipline that will allow waiving conditionality. So I think that the logic of microcredit has proved to be exactly the same.
Okay, we have time for one last question and then it's off. Evelyn.
Okay. First, I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. It's been great. I think you just raised the question I'm about to ask you. I've heard various positions on how basic income should treat the assignability of the income families receive. What I mean by that is, on the one hand, should families be free to use a basic income they receive as collateral for a loan? And many people would argue, no, the basic income should be protected. People should be able to count on that income in order to provide for their necessities. On the other hand, one of the great benefits, I think, of receiving money is that money can be leveraged in the financial market. It can be used by individuals to make decisions, to participate more fully. And I was wondering what your position was on that, if you might speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course, we cannot put strings to basic income because it's a catch-22. Then it's not a basic income anymore, okay? So it's not, I think, we could not envisage to move in this direction, saying people, you could do this, you could do that. Or, for instance, social pensions. In Brazil, there was a debate. Should pensioners, retiree people with pensions, get loans from the bank? Of course, they can do what they want with us. But because their pensions are extremely low, this is why they go to the financial sector to compensate for low pensions, and also because they need to buy medicine, they need to buy things that are not provided by the state anymore. So the point is not only that people are paying for this, but whom are they paying? Because in what they're paying, in their payments back to the banks, there is interest-bearing capital. So you see, it's not only increasing it, we are feeding the rentiers. So you see, this is unacceptable. This is not why social policy is made for. So I think it's very much important to contextualize in what economic situation we are, and try to think about alternatives in order to combine basic income with other issues that are necessary to control this financialized capitalism, which is completely crazy. I agree. Thank you.